Hi, my name is James. I have two 1963 Series 2A Land Rovers. This beige one here is a runner, and I have a red one that's a parts vehicle. The parts vehicle has two windshield wiper motors on it that I find desirable. They have the manual parking feature on them. I'm going to take those apart, resurrect them, and reinstall them on this beige vehicle. For full disclosure, I've already repaired one of these out of the red vehicle, and it went without hitch, so I decided to record this one and post it in case somebody has a similar project in mind. I'm glad I did, though, because I ran into a couple issues that I wasn't expecting, and I was able to fix those. So let's start by taking the spinal one off the red vehicle and tearing it apart, and then putting it back together, and then finding out what the issues were and fixing them in my own way. Here we're just inspecting the outer shell of it, seeing what needs to come apart, and obviously the case needs to be broken, so we'll start by disassembling this one. Wiper arm shaft is held on by a tiny little seat clip. You can see it there. It really is a beast to get off, so I jumped ahead a little bit. You'll see my surprise here in a minute, as I did manage to get the seat clip off. I went ahead and just purchased new ones of those because I feel like I damaged them. They're 1/4-inch seat clips, and you can buy them at most hardware stores. The wiper arm shaft comes out pretty nicely, and then it's just a matter of removing the two covers and getting inside of it and to see what is up and why it doesn't work. Neither one of these worked as I took them apart. They were frozen solid, did not turn, and as you can see here, this thing is just full of hardened grease that I was able to take off in great wads, and then used a brass brush to get the remaining out of the cogs. Little acetone helps in the cleanup. Be careful though, one of those cogs is phenolic. I refrained from using the acetone for fear of dissolving it. The first one that I took apart, I tried to work on it without removing these two fine wires that are on the electric motor, and one of them finally broke, and I realized I was very fortunate that it broke at the very end where I could easily solder it back on. So in this case, I'm just cutting them where I would like them to be cut, such that soldering is a little easier when I put it back together. First step in removing the components of the motor are to remove the brushes. As I've done here, I set them aside and continue taking the stator and the rotor apart. Everything is very stiff and corroded in this motor, so I'm envisioning some quick cleanup with sandpaper, and it should be able to put right back together and start right back up. You can see it's still very stiff. Nothing's coming apart very easily. You even have to pry the motor shaft out prior to it releasing. Quite corroded. Doing a little clean up with some very fine sandpaper. In retrospect, I think maybe Emerald cloth is better. I did use an air compressor to blow out the dust that I created when I sanded it. Put the unit back together, still very stiff. Another disassembly, further inspection. Can't figure out what is causing the motor to still not turn freely in the housing. I'm looking at the brushes here, and I do see a problem that needs to be fixed. One of the brushes has cracked. Pull it out of its housing, and it's just cracked in two. They're fairly worn. Both brushes were in fact fairly worn on all the motors that I took apart. I remember having some spare brushes in some old coffee cans that I have, and I thought I could make another brush rather than trying to source one. So here are the brushes that I found. I don't even remember where these came out of. They may have come out of my a router or an old router that I threw away. Although it came in a parts bag, so I'm not sure exactly where I got them. So here's the old one that I glued back together, and then using a coping saw, I sawed a chunk of that spare brush that I had and matched the size of the old brushes complete as nearly as I could. Reinserting the new brush into its housing. To see if that solves the problem. Still fairly stiff. I got to looking at the that play, or the end play if you will, on the rotor shaft, and pretty excessive, and I'm not sure what the end play is supposed to be, or the backlash, but I did notice an extremely worn part of the shaft on the electric motor, and I measured it, and it was about 90 thousandths, and while I don't know what the measurement is supposed to be, it seemed like 90 thousandths. Find a brass bushing that was about 60 thousandths, and I'll insert that to see if I can clean up that end play a little bit. It did work, but the result was that it pushed the rotor beyond the stator housing by the similar amount, by about 60 thousandths. I'm not sure if that made a difference as far as how the motor performs. The motor is a little bit loud. Actually, it's very loud, but it spins nicely when I hooked it up to the power, and I'm going to go with that. see it does spin, and I'm pretty happy with those results. Here I'm reinstalling the cover. I did have a bit of a problem with the installing the covers, not with the cover itself, but the on-off switch that was behind the cover. I'm not sure who at Lucas designed those, but I think they could have done a little bit better. Had trouble with the contacts making good firm contact such that it stayed on. I think I may remove these after the fact and hotwire those and install an on and off switch for each of the wiper motors on the dash. That might be a more positive way of engaging these wiper motors, but for now we'll put them together as they're supposed to be. Here you can see the general looseness of the contacts as I'm trying to turn the lever to start the motor. I wound up having to bend the springs a little bit underneath to make them firmer. They're still not as good as I'd like them to be, but we'll leave them for now. Now that I've got the front cover reinstalled and the switch working as reliably as possible, I can turn my attention to the rear motor where the cog and the lever for the wiper arm are. Just doing a quick re-clean up to make sure I've got it as clean as possible, and then I'll be reinstalling some all-purpose lubrication. There's an arm that connects the main cog to the wiper arm, and that arm is unidirectional. Be sure that you have it facing the right direction when you reinstall it. It will bind up on the housing if you don't put it in the correct. Check to make sure that it's still working after all the work. And we have rotation. Remember this clip from a few moments back. This is where I tore the gasket off the rear motor compartment. I've been scanning all the gaskets that I pull off this Land Rover and using my laser cutter to print gaskets on gasket paper. It works fairly nicely. Here you can see it printing the gasket for the motor housing and the gaskets for the brackets on the windshield. Prior to reinstalling this back cover, I'm putting a little extra grease on that arm that connects the motor and the rotor arm and reinstalling the nuts. I did notice after putting all three of them on that one of those nuts wasn't seating properly, and after I took it off, I was looking at it. It does have a little concave or convex surface on it that needs to seat in the motor housing, so take a look at that before you screw those down. After taking a look at the video here, I realized it looks like I'm really torquing down on these nuts on the back side of this thing. The fact of the matter was those nuts are just a little odd size. They won't fit my standard socket, neither metric nor SE AE. And here you can see I'm trying to use a wrench to tighten those. So my socket was slipping. I wasn't applying 80 foot-pounds of torque on this. After a quick recheck to make sure everything is still functioning, it's time to reinstall the wiper shaft. Put the new shaft in, reinstalled the spring, the washer, and now to install the new C-clip. Fortunately, it goes on a lot easier. Here I'm installing the back plate that holds the through bolts from the front of the windshield to the wiper motor. The nuts are made out of soft metal and they're slotted. Make sure your screwdriver has a wide enough blade to go from one side to the other side of this nut, or you're going to strip those out for sure. Shaft fully installed and the back plate secured, it's time to install the parking lever. The lever has a slot in it that slots into the wiper arm shaft. Make sure it's seated and then simply screw it down with the brass screw that comes with it. Okay, one final test prior to installing this on the other Land Rover, and this project is done. I know this hasn't been a very professional production, but I'm hoping that this has been useful for some of you. Thanks.